Hello everyone, Scott here again, and welcome back to the Guilty Pleasure Cinema, celebrating the movies you're embarrassed to love, and showcasing those you might have missed. Now, Halloween's past has been a little interesting. You can probably tell, but today is Halloween. I don't do negative reviews. Haven't you been paying attention to that?
Honestly, I wasn't even paying attention to anything in your review, and I don't care what lies you spread.
So much to the point that I really think I'll be able to sit back and just relax this time out, because it's the most Halloween movie yet. Not only is it continuing with the vampire theme, but we've also got werewolves. See, this time we're going to look at Underworld. Yes, I have two copies, the widescreen special edition and the later 2-disc unrated extended cut. Yes, Underworld. Now, what is Underworld? Underworld is a very simple idea of werewolves versus vampires, mixed with a splash of Romeo and Juliet. Now, we've seen the first with werewolves versus vampires many times. It's kind of a common trope now, but it's been in movies since the 40s with the Universal Monster movies. The second part of it, really, well, it's Shakespeare. It's even more timeless. Debatably. But that has even been a thing we've seen in Twilight, with the warring factions, etc., etc. Now, the overall concept is from three guys. Kevin Grevioux, who created really the whole idea, based on some racial history and things like that. Len Wiseman, who directed what we all know I love. It's Live Free or Die Hard. And the screenplay was finished by Danny McBride. Now, Wiseman we've already talked about. It's a hallmark director here at the GBC. He's one of my favorites. Live Free or Die Hard. He's also got Underworld Evolution. He's also got the Total Recall remake. And of course, Underworld is his debut. He's been trying to make a Gears of War movie and many other things. And it's probably going to be in the new Die Hard kind of year one story that's happening as well. So that's gotten some interesting stuff. This was his debut. This was also Grevioux' debut. As a writer, he's been in some bit parts, thug parts, stuff like that. But as a writer, this is his first thing as well. Now, we have looked at I, Frankenstein already earlier this year. And you know how I talked about that and how I love that kind of idea in that franchise. This guy's got cool ideas. This is where it all started. These guys took the basic vampire and werewolf mythos and wove them together into this interracial clandestine Civil War world that just added weight to the crazy action we're coming to see. It added gravity to things in such a more realistic and fantastic way that we couldn't help to want to see it, get invested, and, well, like I said, it gave weight to everything. It made everything matter. So what is this movie? So what is going on is we've got the elitist vampires facing off with the brutal dog warrior werewolves. It goes back to classes where Middle Ages, the vampires would have to hide out during the day, but the werewolves didn't, so they went out and protected them during that. It worked out rather well for both parties until, things went south. Warring factions, warring races, familiar stuff that you really instantly recognize, woven with stuff back and forth that really makes it make sense. Our hero, the Bois Kate Beckinsale, take your pick from any number of pictures here. Believe it or not, she was considered not hot enough for the role. Actually, they did digitally enhance her boobs on this, and she was all for it considering. She plays Celine, a death dealer on the vampire side. Now, death dealer is a pretty stupid name, right? And yet I don't need to really explain what it is, do I? Of course not. You know what a death dealer is. It's pretty obvious, so it works. She and her squad of death dealers are battling the lichens and the werewolves. Lycanthropy. Lycanthrope, you get it. What basically is happening with them is these vampires are trying to stop the werewolves. Put the species out, because they're below them. Okay? What is going on, though, is the werewolves are trying to find this Corvin guy, who is apparently ancestral to them because the first werewolf has the pure strain of the werewolf blood. and they want to find him to further empower their species. Now, sequel stuff goes further into that, but basically they find a guy, and Selene finds him as well, because she's just fighting them and whatever. What happens is they bite him, the werewolves, the lichens, and what we get from that pretty much is a Romeo and Juliet with a vampire and a werewolf. Of course. I mean, I'm not joking when I say that. It's Romeo and Juliet with werewolves and vampires. And yet, that's classic and it works. And during all that, of course, you get classic imagery as well. So, what do you do to go beyond all of that? Well, you have the mentors lying, you have the enemy telling the truth, and everyone wondering what's going on with everyone playing all sides. Because of course you do. During that, though, are all the scenes of action and violence you come to expect from something, as I said, 4 years removed from the original Matrix. And kind of learning things from how the Matrix sequels faltered, because they came shortly thereafter. It took the good stuff and ran with it. Basically, long story short, Selene's a glorified hitman. But what is this movie? It's an origin story. It really is. There's some slow stuff, as we really have to tell you all of this backstory and things. I mean, this is a comic book that goes on and adapts the thing, but there's not action on every single page in this. It's just part of what we get. This takes a while to get there, and yet you have to get there. And I've always said the best origin stories are the ones where you care about the characters before the thing happens. I mentioned a Die Hard remake. That's going to be weird because Die Hard John McClane is normal guy in the wrong place at the right time. What makes his stories before that interesting? Well, hopefully they are, but that's not what makes him John McClane Die Hard. That's Die Hard makes that. Spider-Man is a very slow plotting movie because Peter Parker's not a remarkable, watchable person going into that. He's down on his luck, and literally, the bite makes him better. That's the point, or he thinks, and goes from there. His life still kind of sucks. He's still bad with the girls, but he swings, and with great power comes great responsibility. That's the character, but you don't need half a movie to get there, right? Issue 1's kind of like you're learning, you're getting there, and then you're expecting issue 2, except when you're doing a movie and it takes 2 to 3 years, movie 2 is rough. Thankfully, with Underworld, and this is the sketch to scene comparison, they had ideas for where they were going with this early on. This world has to be established. Good thing is, it's a cool world to look at. Like very, very visual, very interesting. So when we're watching the vampires go about their day and be kind of boring and blah, 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 it's still interesting. You're still intrigued. You're like, what are they doing? What's going on? Why? Because what they do is they actually take some science and really go with it in the mysticism of vampires and werewolves. It's interesting. They make sure to make it interesting when they're not shooting guns and slashing swords and being werewolves and vampires. They're characters beyond that. It doesn't help that they are slow, stoic, icy vampires that does take its time and plod along when it's not being balls out crazy with its action. The action comes quite infrequently compared to the rest of the proceedings, but the proceedings are interesting, like I said, thanks to the story it's telling. It's just not why we're here. Just because there is a story doesn't make it better, and doesn't mean we're all here to see it and learn about it every single page all the way through. Sometimes the good stories are stuff that's left unsaid. In sci-fi, I've always heard this quote, sometimes good sci-fi leaves you with more questions than answers when you went in. Now, that goes both ways, because sometimes you're tired of being teased and you want solid answers. Thankfully, this does get there. Sometimes just 1 or 2 lines like Anna's talk of the hunts in her village in Predator is all you need to go, oh, okay, there's more to this. I've said it twice already, but it is very much a Matrix descendant in that, yeah, it's all covered in leather and stuff, but it also really benefits from the hindsight of things and immerses us into the dark gothic world hidden away from the norm. See, what's going on in the grand scheme of things is the Lycans, if they get their way, they take out the vampires, and then humanity, because of course, bad guys. The vampires just want to coexist and have things go along the way they are. Like the Blade movies. We'll get there. Really, they want things to be normal and just keep living like princes, like the way they have been. So, what went wrong? Honestly, not much. It's basically origin trappings, because a lot went right. And like I said, Amazing Spider-Man suffered. Spider-Man suffered. Fantastic Four suffered. The new Fantastic Four suffered. Origin stories are very hard to do. You want to tell a story that's interesting before the stuff happens. Iron Man is how you do it. It is the perfect origin story. Green Lantern kind of gets there. He's at least interesting, but we don't care a lot yet. But there's a lot going on that we do. He's likable in ways. Wolverine's kind of there because he's already kind of special anyway. But beforehand, he's just some sick kid and we don't care. Can you imagine a whole movie where Wolverine's just a sick kid before he gets his claws popping out? No, that's why it was the pre-credit sequence, right? Iron Man does that. Iron Man, thanks to Robert Downey Jr. and Jon Favreau's directing, really made Tony Stark interesting. It made you care before we actually got anywhere with that movie. Underworld does that. It makes you care really before we get anywhere in it. And yet, the very first visuals in that are Selene dropping down in a very cool way. In one shot, which sadly is cut before they actually finish it. The stunt woman dropped and walked. It was very cool in the trailer. It's one drop. And you're like, oh, that's cool. What's going on? You're invested immediately before you even know that there is a war between two factions and the other stuff going on. You don't even get involved in that. You're just like, I'm in. You hooked me. You got me. They basically trailered the very first part. However, although while they're introducing this stuff and making it interesting because, well, it is getting there, it's not wasting time because Selene already is a death dealer. She's good at her job. They're not wasting around showing her to learn. She's good at it. It's like she's a transporter but doesn't get to do it enough because we got to now learn the stuff going on. But what is there to like? A lot. A whole hell of a lot. When she does get to do her job, it's outstanding stuff with Wiseman's awesome direction, Beckinsale's badass look. Scott Speedman's Michael is a bit drab, and Michael Sheen's Lucian is comically over the top. But Bill Nighy's amazing Victor steals the show, and really actually introduced him to so many people. He literally got a huge genre career resurgence thanks to this. There is something I've got to say, though, because even though he's an awesome vampire lord with a cool sword and has a great scene where he, well, has a good fight, he's also really bad at not spilling stuff. He doesn't. I guess when you get older, you don't care. I mean, he's got a goblet like this that really should be a sippy cup. Combine that with Patrick Tatopoulos' great creature effects, tying it all together with a thumping soundtrack, and it's just flat out fun to watch. I mean, most critics hated this movie. We're talking here. You see this pile. You've been seeing me do this for 4 years. You know why I like it, and a lot of fans did too. It became a cult classic pretty much immediately. Like it started something new. And what's cool is the vampires, when they're kind of getting together with their squads, they can take out werewolves of even numbers, no problem. One werewolf has no chance. And a death dealer who's good enough can take out maybe 2 or 3. It's kind of a Predator Aliens kind of thing, if you harken back to the Versus ones. They're just competent. They're good. They're technological. They're cunning. They're vampires with guns and swords and leather. But the werewolves are these brutal dog warriors, like I've been saying. And one-on-one, just a normal werewolf and a normal vampire, that vampire is going to get absolutely wrecked by that werewolf. He will destroy him and just take him out. So there's actually a case where you've got them like these confident vampires, but if he's alone, he's screwed. And you feel it. Like, you know this guy is going to wreck him. Now, size isn't always a thing, but it's supernatural stuff, and there you go. But when it's squad on squad, a little more even. Because the werewolves don't really use guns when they're werewolves. Obviously. Unless it's an elder. Now, I mentioned Victor, and, well, he gets involved, and things go from there. And he's able to take out a werewolf pretty handily. Death dealers as well, like Selene. But in general, some of them really, really suck. It's only the good ones, like Selene and Victor, who truly have a chance. Unless they're facing That's not something we do here anymore at the GBC. We're not going to spoil that whole thing for you just quite here. You want to see it, you got to watch the movie. We're not summarizing things anymore. That's the new motto. That's the new creed. Go watch it. And I hope I've gotten you interested to actually watch it. Of course, beyond that, you want to add in science to things. Because, of course you do. The werewolves developed UV bullets. So the vampires counter it with silver nitrate bullets. And that alone should give you an idea of just how crazy things will get. We've taken the mysticism of classical vampires and werewolves, made them modern, European, but taken that element and actually put science into it with not only the blood strain and how it's not a mysticism thing, it's actually a virus that's infected them, but also then put them in developing advanced technology to kill the other species. It really goes well beyond any kind of ancient texts and things like that, and honestly goes beyond stuff that vampire hunters or slayers deal with. But all told, it goes well beyond anything we'd seen to that point as far as vampires and werewolves. They didn't make a universal type thing where there's this one and that one. Shared franchises mean they might, but we're not quite there yet. What we're starting with is Underworld. And that was Underworld. A modern cult classic by geeks that made good, that gives you what you expect and plays off that to give you more that you don't. Yet even more that you do in all new, unique ways. It created a franchise that is still going today thanks to an amazing stinger as well. It's a confident movie that honestly achieved a whole hell of a lot with very, very little by people who'd never done anything like that before. That's just cool in its own regard. And saying quite a bit for things. Overall, what they ended up doing, because they hadn't done it before, was made something people had never seen before. Something people have been copying for years since. I mean, you can look at releases for similarly themed movies, not just by Lionsgate and Summit, but just anything else that came out around the same time. You're getting this kind of marketing involved, similar with how the Twilight stuff got that kind of marketing going a few years later. This precedes Twilight by a half decade, by the way. Not saying it's better or anything. I mean, yeah, I am. But, you know, you get my meaning. This had its day. Twilight springboarded off of that. You get the idea. Now, really, everybody's been trying to copy this one, and it's still going too. Basically because it's a simple story that will always work, tied together with good action and very, very pretty visuals. So next up, we continue with the adventures, and we get back to normal. Not like old-fashioned adventure like this, and not even like, well, serial adventures or like that. We're going to go to something more traditional, a little more weird, and it's, well, a movie with a man named after a car. Yep, that's next. So I hope you join me for that, and remember, you shouldn't feel guilty about it if it's a movie you love. Damn it. Happy Halloween. Whether you like it or not, you're in the middle of a war that's been raging for the better part of 1,000 years. A blood feud between vampires and lycans, werewolves. A tide of anger and retribution will spill out into the night. Differences will be set aside. Allegiances will be made. And soon, I will become the hunted. Now, Wiseman we've already looked at. Live Free or Die Hard. That's a Hallmark. It's nuts. Everything goes. It's fair game. And really,